But Anthony Moyles joined Owen on Tuesday's OTB AM. He had a theory for what the Irish rugby team need to do to get their Six Nations ambitions back on track.
They need a good piss up this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. Is that what you would have done during times when confidence was low?
Yeah. Get the pool table out, Frankie Dolan-esque.
It is a tricky one. I'm sure. Like, once the confidence is that sort of low, or there is sort of this mystique around why it's so low, it's like sometimes there is much more ridiculous ideas than actually, you know, going on the piss for a couple of days or doing something to just distract yourself.
Yeah, it's definitely been a theory that's put out there by lots of other sources as well later in the week. Alan Quinlan, good morning to you.
Good morning, Adrian. I was the first one to say it. Was it last week?
You were up there, yeah, yourself.
Monday.
Were you saying it on Monday?
I think I said it on Monday,
that was the first.
The text getting stolen now. It's disgusting, isn't it? Gordon Darcy and Brian O'Driscoll following suit as well.
We've Ronan O'Gara on the line from Brisbane as well. But what I mean, it's too easy though, isn't it? Like,
it's too easy to say, just go out and have. But I think the message kind of around that is just relax a little bit. It's not even to go out and get hammered. It's just to take a little bit of pressure off and maybe train a little bit less this week and kind of enjoy themselves a bit more, because it is a very highly pressurised environment, and up to this point it's worked incredibly well, and they've kind of hit a bit of a stumbling block. And really, I've been trying to think about this, because everywhere you go people say, what's gone wrong with Ireland? And I'm trying to think about it, look at it, assess it, watch back games. I think the endeavour is still there, the passion is still there. Is the execution still there? Maybe a little bit, and that's coming down. That's on the back of the opposition putting on massive pressure on. Like, if you're the champions of any league or any at any level, I think when you go and play someone, the opposition are far more alert and determined to beat you. And I think in the first three games, Ireland encountered three teams who, obviously, they had their own plan and structure, the way they wanted to play, but most of it was based around how do we stop Ireland, how do we frustrate them, how do we close down their space. And then they've kind of been put in a position of really intense pressure and a strategy around how to stop them. And they haven't really encountered that in a while, because usually they're on the front foot, they get over the gain line, they kick well. Guys make line breaks and they score tries and they build pressure and momentum themselves. So they've had to that's kind of had an effect on them as well. And probably the English game was a bit of a hammer blow. Joe's mentioned that during the week. So maybe just take a little bit of pressure off, remind each other that we're good players and what we've achieved last year, and have a few points and stuff.
Yeah. It nearly takes on a life of its own, doesn't it?
Does,
that's the difficulty now, that it's like the Liverpool comparison, that, like, actually, if there are a couple of bits and pieces going wrong, they might be fixed in the grand scheme. Let's say Liverpool had been fourth or fifth, they're out of the title race. That stuff might have just been fixed and come right, but the spotlight is on them.
And look, they can still win 4 games, Adrian. You know what I mean? It's going to Cardiff, beating France at home, and Wales are going to be a different proposition. But just to relax a little bit and maybe just remind themselves.
But it's difficult to relax but that's the point, isn't it? That it's actually really difficult to relax.
It is, and listen, the Six Nations has always been an intense period. The only problem I would have if gone out for a few pints, if I was with back in my days, I have to babysit ROG for the night. So I wouldn't be able to relax. I just have to mind Tim, you know.
We don't even have him on the line yet to get the slag in.
But it's true, like.
There's a good shot of the two there.
And why would he have to babysit him?
Just to mind him that he doesn't get lost and ramble off somewhere, you know what I mean?
Would that be a thing? We all have that sort of mate that you have to look after on a night out.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. You know? Just keep him on track.
We'll get Ronan on the line and put that to him, I'm sure, in a few minutes' time. But we did want to talk about the big story that's been doing the rounds over the last 48 hours, that broke initially in the New Zealand Herald in relation to World Rugby. And these proposals that we'll try and make as succinct here as possible to bring people up to speed who haven't heard it just yet. And at some point or another, Tommy's going to put up the fixtures as well, that the potential fixture list that Ireland would have, just to give you a proper sense of what this new initiative might look like. So it's the World League, or the Nations Championship, as I've seen referred to by Brett Gosper, who's the CEO of World Rugby. The general ideas around this: Japan and USA would join the existing Rugby Championship teams. All the main Northern Hemisphere teams would take on the major Southern Hemisphere teams every year. Now, there'd be no relegation or promotion was the initial word that was going through on this. So that would close the door to the likes of Fiji and Georgia and Romania and Samoa, etc. It seems for 10 years. That's been slightly countered by World Rugby, but that was the initial word that was coming through. So on the foot of that, 40 international players had a conference call on Tuesday. They'd said loosely that they'd welcomed the idea at the back end of last year, but had major reservations about it now. And those reservations were in relation to things like player fatigue, specifically, and this was delivered through Johnny Sexton, who's in his role as president of the International Rugby Players. And it was to do with player workload, long haul travel, lack of opportunities obviously for tier 2 nations as well, and that those concerns, Johnny Sexton said, had been disregarded as World Rugby looked to turn a big buck, albeit. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. Since that, Brett Gosper, who's the CEO of World Rugby, has been tweeting, say, the conversations with all key stakeholders continues, that it's still an evolving concept, and World Rugby themselves saying that the manner of the player's statement is not to their liking. So it strikes me as if at some point or another World Rugby decided they were going to fly a kite and say, here's our proposals. They're not exactly watertight, but let's see what the public mood is like. And the public mood is not great about that.
I'm just very surprised that it's come to the point of a bit of a standoff here, that this wasn't kind of done behind closed doors until they had some sort of an agreement of where they're going and if the concept was going to work. Because it doesn't look good for World Rugby if you have all the players coming out saying, well, this is ludicrous, or this is not going to work, or this is something we don't want. I just find it, I struggle to think how it's got to that point. The proposal was muted last year, then there was a meeting obviously in the end of January in San Francisco, and all the key stakeholders were there. The players weren't there, but representatives from all the unions. And in principle, the idea is a good one. It's kind of, you could say it's exciting, it's something different, it's going to be more competitive matches, it's going to be a different feel to another tournament. But then you start peeling it back and you say, well, player welfare is the biggest one that's the concern, and international rugby players, there's been
tweets of Augustin Pichot there, World Rugby as well, outlining his own position, and he's also come in for a bit of fire under this. But they've been at pains obviously to try and pour a bit of cold water on it.
But they never mentioned anything about the promotion relegation when this came out yesterday.
They didn't, no.
To clarify, well, there will be promotion relegation after 1 year, 2 year, 5 years, 3 years, whatever. This is what we're proposing to do with the tier 2 nations. Well, why not set up a tier 2 league that they can do something similar and play against each other all over the world as well?
It's fairly obvious, I think, isn't it, that if you do the 2 tiers of 12, USA will certainly get relegated and will struggle to actually be team 13 and 14 and struggle to get promoted again, and they need USA as part of this, because otherwise, why would they revamp the entire calendar?
And look, it's kind of understanding in some ways. There's for and against with all these arguments on the game. They're trying to grow the game to bigger markets. So Japan is a massive market, a huge population, and North America. But the Canadians then would say, well, why are we being excluded? We want to go straight into this as well. And they could argue maybe we're stronger than USA. But the USA is seen as a kind of a sleeping giant, maybe.
It's fair enough too. Like, I actually understand the sort of thirst to include them in some sort of interaction.
It's just hard to get it right, I think. And Pichot's, Augustin Pichot and Brett Gosper are pushing this. And to be fair, I'm not totally against it. I just think, how does it work that you keep everyone happy? Well, it's hard to keep everyone happy with any sort of proposal. The games are already being played, shall we say. So there's the Six Nations, the summer tour, there's 3 tests, and then there's 3 tests in November. So but you're adding in a semi-final and final at the end of November, which Johnny Sexton spoke about, to ask anyone to play 5 consecutive weeks in test matches is not good for player welfare. We hear the English players speaking about it all the time, about the length of time in their season. I read some stuff that Ben Young said yesterday that, okay, if this goes ahead and that we're actually playing more internationals potentially, and that we're going to have travel to the Southern Hemisphere, and a lot of that, it doesn't dramatically change hugely the amount of games they're actually going to play, because they do, But historically, I think because it's a league, will the top players have to play more of these internationals to make sure they're in the qualifying
Well, that's
positions?
the thing, yeah.
It does make them a little bit more. There's less manoeuvre for November is always a case of you play at least one tier 2 nation, so you have a chance to blood players and stuff like that. So there's a lot of moving parts to this. I think the biggest concern is the player welfare.
Yeah.
And then maybe the biggest concern is next in line is the tier 2 nations. So we probably have 8 to 10 teams who can potentially win a World Cup in 6 months. Ideally, you want to increase that to 13, 14. How do you do that? I know World Rugby have an ambition, and they do it. There's a lot of good work goes on in those nations for sure. That sometimes they get bashed and it doesn't get mentioned. Particularly in the Pacific Islands, in Canada, in Georgia, in Romania, in Uruguay. John Lacey, the international referee, at the moment is in San Francisco working with USA, Uruguay, and Canada, I think, for kind of 4-day blocks to try and help them around the laws of the game and get them up to speed and improve them. So there's a lot of good stuff like that goes on. There's a lot of good coaches. They've helped fund some of the coaches in some of the tier 2 nations and some of the rugby programs. It's a difficult scenario, you know what I mean, to try and increase the quality of those tier 2 nations.
But here's the thing, right? So part of the rationale here is to include the USA in some sort of major tournament to milk that market, right?
Yeah, so to try and get more money, more investment, more sponsorship, more players.
And that's absolutely sound logic. I don't see any truck with any of that at all, and the same applies to Japan, right?
So wouldn't it be brilliant if USA were capable of beating Ireland, England, Wales, Scotland?
So what they've done here is something that happens in political circles all the time. They'll float out sort of that they've had a bit of a discussion about a plan, and we haven't quite finalised it, but here's kind of what we're thinking, and they get all the feedback and they go, right, most of the stuff that we're talking about is not, the player fatigue one might be more difficult not to crack, but most of the other stuff is crackable in some way, shape or form, but they can come up with a solution to some of the other stuff. But when you do come to that solution, which I think is not, particularly in terms of the promotion relegation thing, one thing that leaves that is left for me that is insolvable, doesn't it kill Rugby World Cup? Why would you need a Rugby World Cup?
It does kind of dilute it.
Why would you need it? You already know who the best team, every year now you know who the best team on the planet is. There's no requirement every 4 years to gather and have a tournament.
You're very right to say that it does dilute that, and so there's so many there's probably more negatives than positives here, and it's probably been driven more so by SANZAR, which are the Southern Hemisphere unions, because financially they're probably the ones in most need, particularly Australia, South Africa and Argentina, who need to generate more money and that they're financially have problems. So a TV deal to cover this World League will automatically give them a payday, a good slice of the TV money. It's a really tricky one. There's so many things. I think the problem World Rugby have now is, and I'd love to see it, I'm out of the game, I'd love to see all these games and be travelling around, maybe working for some of them, and the concept, and it might work brilliantly. And it might create more opportunities. So you'd now have a situation, Adrian, where you need to have a squad of 40 players probably for your international team. Yeah. You're literally swapping over from one week to the next and trying, does that dilute the national jerseys of teams? We saw New Zealand last November, they probably had 3 test teams. One where they played in Japan, they made a load of changes for the English game, load of changes for the Irish game. They probably had up in 50 or 60 players, I think, at one stage being involved in those test matches around November. Steve Hansen got a bit of criticism from because that coveted all-black jersey is so hard to get, and there's so much history with it. You'll probably see more of that if it happened. But I don't think we should knock World Rugby completely here and go, it's not a crazy idea, but I think there needs to be more conversations and more discussions about it. And going back to the Ben Youngs thing, his quotes and the way he spoke, he's a passionate Leicester man. So what does the Leicester Tiger fan think of possibly seeing very, very little of Ben Youngs in the future? Because they have their own issues in the Gallagher Premiership at the moment around number of games they play and number of internationals. So it just, he mentioned that. What does my club think?
Yeah.
They mightn't see me as much, So
it might have the same kind of impact as the provincial game has had on the club
look,
game.
What's come out now is World Rugby have got to take the views of the international players on board and say, right, obviously there's a lot more talk and conversation to go on here, but I would like to see, maybe it's not feasible to see a Tier 2 World League, that they're actually playing one as well, the Tier 2 nations, that they can say, right, we're playing regular competitive fixtures, and that here's something we want to aim for to try and get to the top. But you just imagine there's going to be a lopsided situation for a couple of years with USA and Japan.
Yeah.
And Japan have shown in the past for sure that in World Cups, and when they get themselves together, and they'll be actually very dangerous to this World Cup, that they can hit those big performances on occasions as well. But you can imagine New Zealand playing USA in Auckland.
It'll be New Zealand B. That's the solution to the player fatigue thing.
Yeah.
Do you think this is like trying to combat in a way the view of rugby and the test culture that exists, that may be a little bit antiquated, that people see, like personally I've got no issue with the test culture, particularly around November, like beating the All Blacks and stuff. I was happy as the next person about that, but the criticism is like, I should have only friendlies and wait till they actually win the World Cup. That actually when people say where's the trophy at the end of the year, actually here's the trophy. This is the World Rugby are trying to combat, to try and get away from this antiquated notion of a test culture.
We probably would have had that trophy in 2018, yeah. So it's, but look, it's the issue with rugby is there's a lot of historical, sentimental attachment to some of the competitions, particularly, and rightly so. Six Nations is an incredibly famous and historical tournament. You go tampering with that a little bit, and there's a fair bit of resistance. I wrote a piece there last week about, the possibility of having promotion relegation. It's come up before in the Six Nations, and Georgia are ranked higher in the world rankings over Italy. Italy beat them in November, which was that was a really, really important fixture for Italy in case anybody starts talking about it. But I think promotion relegation, the Six Nations, is something that should be looked at, and diluting the calendar year and like, I love the concept of summer tours. And you ask any of the players, are these friendlies? We never viewed them as friendlies. They never felt like a friendly.
But non-rugby fans do, and this is what they're trying to target, is the non-rugby fan.
Understandable, yeah. But I look at ultimately at the end of the day, I think this has been commercially driven, and Kieran Reid has said that. And for the players, Owen Farrell, Kieran Reid, and Johnny Sexton, three high-profile players, to come out publicly with this kind of resistance and the statements they've made would indicate that they're poles apart in their thinking.
Yeah, but I think they can get around the table and actually.
Yeah, well, look, I think I'm surprised that it's got to this stage, that this kind of thinking and arguing and
publicly is maybe the biggest advice.
Yeah, that it should have been done privately, and that they got some sort of an agreement where the players can say, yeah, look, we're pretty pleased and we're probably excited. There's still a bit of manoeuvring to go on, but the concept and the idea is something that we think is a good thing. But for the players to come out like this, I just think World Rugby and have maybe made a mistake, that it's got to this stage, because what's happening now is people will hear the voices of the players over World Rugby, which is maybe shouldn't have got to that stage.
Ronan O'Gara, good morning to you, good evening.
Hiya, how's it going?
We're just discussing the World Rugby proposals this week, the kite that's been flown by them. What are your own thoughts?
Yeah, I've been trying to read up on it because I knew I was going to be talking about it, so it's complicated. I think Quinny's points are very valid. There's a lot to it, obviously, but the addition, I think, of Japan, USA playing against particularly New Zealand, they're mismatches every time, but it's the crux of the issue is it's all driven by money, and that's what it's coming down to. But I think, as you alluded to already, that the players and the players' union are not really is an understatement. They are at loggerheads with World Rugby, and World Rugby have said they're very surprised with the players' union's reaction to it. So I think it's it is disappointing that for some professional bodies that this is how it's been played out.
Yeah,
it should be, as you said, grown men in the room discussing it and getting it right.
Does that surprise you the most, Rog? It certainly does for me that World Rugby kind of let this proposal out, and then there's this negative reaction from the players. I'm just really surprised it got to that it wasn't done behind closed doors, that they could put draft something, a table of contents down on paper and say, this is what we're potentially looking at. We still have a bit to go to agree it, but I'm just amazed that World Rugby have kind of released it, and then the international rugby players have gone, hold on a minute, we think this is crazy. Basically, that's what they're saying. I'm just surprised.
I think maybe I'm reading between the lines, is there some big pressure from obviously the money men behind these decisions, and the fact that I think every nation is guaranteed 14 million extra, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's a case of you need to get your ducks in a row, boys, and this money will be guaranteed for you. And money makes the world go round, and there's uproar over here on the fact that the Pacific nations have been excluded for 12 years. It's just, you can't do that to nations like Samoa, Tonga, Fiji. You know, that's, I think, the beauty of rugby, is the fact that so many good players coming from these islands, small islands, and a lot of them end up playing in New Zealand and in Australia, but they have massive pride in their own identity for playing for countries like that. And rugby was a game for all shapes and all sizes and all people, and now all of a sudden it seems to me that there's going to be massive exclusion, and I think the supporters are probably hurt in that regard.
Yeah, World Rugby have issued a statement to say that nothing's been signed or sealed, and that actually the idea of promotion and relegation is definitely something they could look at. So whether it was part of the initial proposal or not, it does seem to me...
They just forgot that bit.
They forgot that bit, but they can bring it back easily.
That was a retract, wasn't it? They didn't initially come out with that. They came out with that after...
Yeah.
After the reaction,
but, So
the strong comeback from the Players' Union.
Yeah, and the point being that, right, that's easily fixed. You sit in a room, you fix it in 2 seconds flat. But the thing that we've just been discussing there, I don't know if you might have just not been on the line at the time, but the thing that they can fix is that suddenly tournaments like Rugby World Cup become fairly redundant in the context of every year you know who the best team on the planet is. So why do you need to gather every 4 years to decide the same thing?
Yeah, and I think the idea of I was just telling, I think in terms of reshaping and change, I think change is always necessary for the betterment. But there's no point changing something and then realising 18 months into something, oh, we've got this wrong. So it needs thorough thought through and thorough thought process about how you want to restructure it. And I don't think the World Cup will ever be devalued. I think that has a special place in their heart, along with Lions tours, and there has been proposals to keep those tours alive. But so much of it too is going to be based on, you know, when you look at the 3 games that the Southern Hemisphere teams play, and then the 5 games that one of the teams has to play in a row, where are they actually playing and who has home advantage? Stuff like that still applies if you want to be the champion in this. But it's a league where, you know, I mean, in terms of the US coming in, because it's such a market with such growth opportunities and such big finance available, so that's why they're included. Argentina get into from the 4 champions, so it's a lot of, I suppose, the powerful countries that are getting looked after. But you know what I mean, there has to be an incentive for the growing or the up and coming nations in rugby if you're looking to grow their sport. Otherwise you're going to have, actually, I think, a diminished model.
Ronan, do you think that the sport actually kind of needs something as radical as this? Because it seems that this is almost like a fix. I don't want to say they're pressing the panic button, but it is radical. Do you think we actually need this in the sport?
No, but what I do think would be interesting would be, having spent a bit of time down here in New Zealand and Australia, I think what would be great would be, if it could be managed, if they were flipped. So I think Ireland should be going to New Zealand in November if it wasn't working in New Zealand's November, and then the New Zealand and Australia. If we're able to flip to the reverse of actually what happens now, I think it both happens that we go to they come to Ireland when it's winter and we go to them when it's winter. It's a completely different game. So there would be potential in that regard to actually play, because New Zealand, from my generation of players, were completely kind of have a very, very different perception of what the reality is down here. We were in 3 weeks in New Zealand, and it was lashing rain and dark 4 o'clock every day in the middle of June, and then they actually get a good summer where you can actually play a decent rugby. I'm not using that as an excuse for underperforming down there, but the fact then that they come up to Ireland in November when it's the middle of winter in Ireland, when you could actually kind of try and make it more appealing to fans to come out and see a dry ball game.
Yeah. Do a summer job. Yeah, it's a good idea.
It's a good question as to whether we actually need this thing or not, isn't it?
Yeah, but look, Roger's saying there, and I think it's important. We shouldn't be afraid of change. I think change is good. Change can be unsettling at times, but it can be good. And I think the reality of making the game more of a global game, and there's certain markets throughout the world. You look at football, the way it's a global game and it generates massive money. You look at the Premier League clubs across Asia, the way a lot of their money and finance comes from there, from jersey sales, from tours, from having fans there. So making the game more global for sure, and that's the one kind of downside from rugby. It's not in those markets where there's massive populations and they're untapped. So the idea to do that is to make it more global, get a big TV.
It's not so much about who wins this tournament, it's more about the opportunity for the USA and Japan essentially.
But the problem is then you've so many stakeholders along the way, Six Nations, World Cup, Lions Tours, all this kind of stuff, and then player welfare. And rightly so, the players are very strongly representative now, and if you don't have the players on board, you don't have a tournament, you don't have matches.
That would be the problem though, if it is about who doesn't win. If it's not about who wins, then the whole thing is flawed. If you've got a competition that it doesn't matter who wins, then the whole thing's pointless.
I'm not saying, hang on now, I'm not saying it doesn't matter who wins. What I'm saying is the tournament is not built to create a world champion because we already have a tournament for that. It's built to ensure that the likes of
Ireland in
USA and Japan get games against the top tier nations.
Where does that leave Europe and Super Rugby? So if Ireland are playing in, hypothetically, if it was 2018, we'd probably be in a semi-final scenario. And I'm just saying hypothetically, and then what happens when that semi-final finishes? You have a very intense 5-week period, and then Munster, Leinster and Ulster are looking to rock on in Europe.
Yeah.
And then Six Nations again.
And then, you have 2 fixtures in November, you have 2 fixtures in December in Europe, then you have Pro 14 derbies around Christmas, and then you have 2 fixtures in January, and away you go, Six Nations. So it's I don't know, it's just a very tricky one. There's so many kind of variables to what can and can't happen. And but look, like I said, my biggest surprise is that this divide has gone public. Nothing should have been released about this until the players were on board and unions were on board and everyone is in agreement, right? We're happy to do something based on this table of contents, X, Y, Z, whatever. And here's something that may work, and we may trial it in.
You should go in there in some sort of advisory capacity.
Well, I'd be a good negotiator, yeah.
Steering committee is what I'm saying.
No, but look, the easy thing here is kick World Rugby and say, oh, this is just money. Look, it is.
Well,
money.
It is.
We need money, but it's not just money. I said it's not. Look, it is a chance.
It is though
to make the game global.
But that's for money. That's for
but your Premier League or any of the leagues.
Yeah.
They need
I'm not
money.
saying it in a negative way or any judgmental way.
You look at the football TV deals, that's because the market wanted throughout the world. That's why the money is so. That's why Sky are paying $4 billion for Premier League rights, and BT are playing whatever, and that's why there's so much market for that. But who's turning on the rugby in Asia? to watch Six Nations, or there'd be a few expats and people who may be into rugby clubs in different parts. I've been to Singapore before, and Kuala Lumpur, there's rugby clubs there and there's a lot of expats. But in general, I mean, you'll never get to the same level as football, but the concept and the idea is to generate more money and make the game global. But
yeah, I think they're probably, sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead, Rog.
No, I just think I would say there would be an appetite potentially biannually for, the top two in the Six Nations playing off against the top two in the rugby championships. There is an appetite, I think, for something different. There's most definitely, I think, a thought for exploration on that front. But the radical change in terms of presenting this is how it's going, and nearly a take it or leave it option. It just seems that they've overstepped the mark World Rugby have, in my point of view, in terms of pressing this new formula on players because of, I suppose, the financial rewards.
And they're trying to do this stuff, Rog, because obviously the Sanzar deal is up in 2020, that TV deal, and the Six Nations TV deals would run out in 2021. BBC, Virgin Media, ITV and NBC in America cover them. So these TV deals are kind of coming up in 20 and 21, and they're trying to, create something different where there's one kind of global scenario.
Why couldn't they add the USA into the Six Nations and Japan into the Rugby Championship, and that solves it?
Yeah.
Honestly, what's wrong with that?
I think every Georgian rugby fan would spontaneously combust.
So there's some. So I mean, you're back to the nitty-gritty of whether you're promotion or relegation, and of course that's what we should have. We should have that now.
Because you can't do that, because because of the geographic location of the USA. What have they got to do with the?
Well, the whole drive. I'm assuming that the entire driving factor behind all of this project is, as Quinny says, it's to make money. And I don't say that in any judgmental way. That's what it is, and that's to grow the game. And you're not going to do that with the best will in the world by adding Georgia or Fiji or Samoa. You are going to do it by adding the USA and Japan.
Yeah, you are definitely added two of the biggest markets in the world, no doubt about it. It's
But there's no fairness around that, because you mentioned Fiji, Tonga and Samoa and the incredible players they have there, and they don't have the infrastructure or the populations to pack out 80,000 seater stadiums. But it's one little rumble on a bit.
Yeah, that too. But I think you look upon memories of winning medals. You look upon in our career, Quinny, playing for your country. But like, one of the most, I think, rewarding and satisfying moments that we had as players was going on a tour to Tonga and Samoa.
Brilliant.
I think they're the memories we have for a lifetime. You just see the locals, you see what touring means, you see, I think, all the great values of rugby union when you go and you spend time in these countries, and you see essentially the survival mode of what these unions have and the challenges they have. I think rugby, especially the Tier 1 nations, have an absolute duty to look after these nations to grow the game. You cannot turn the blind eye to that. I think player welfare, is really important, but the most important thing, I think, at the minute is given these kind of, I suppose, the growing nations, Pacific nations. Rugby in Spain is getting bigger. Rugby in Georgia is getting bigger. You have to if you come up with a 12-year proposal with radical kind of non-incentive rules, the game is dead in these countries, and you just, I think, shot yourself in the foot.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that aspect of it. My other big topic that I love to get into is how Leinster are a feeder club for all the other provinces, and that continues.
He's hard to listen to, Rog. He's hard to listen to this fella.
Jeez.
That continues with the news that Jack McGrath, it seems...
have you your Leinster jersey on?
No, he's a red jumper on, but he's actually a Connacht man.
I go out of that. Jesus.
He's on the other side of the Shannon. And
Jack McGrath reporting that the reports are that he himself has initiated the potential to join Ulster next season in a very same scenario as the Carberry, Murphy deals that have gone through over the last little while.
No, it's not. It's not. Well, I think they're all different deals, Adrian. I think.
Go on, yeah.
It's a very interesting one, and I think it caught me by surprise very much so too. In the fact, like, you're kind of going, why would Jack McGrath go with us? But then on closer inspection, that's, I think, what people sometimes forget. Like, there's a massive competitor inside Jack McGrath. 17 minutes coming off the bench, or 27, isn't floating his boat at the minute, and he wants to try and have a bit. You know, I think he's 29, 30 as he's hit that age.
Yeah.
And I think at that stage too, the best judge of these things are always the person directly involved, and it's Jack McGrath. So he has said, Cian Healy has reinvented himself. I was the man in possession. I need to go in now and I need to find something. Is it game time I need? Yes, it probably is. I need to get playing 3 out of every 4 weeks. Where can I do that? I don't want to go overseas. I want to play for Ireland. Ulster is a big option. I would say you can underplay and overplay this, but that's what I read out of his interview.
Is that not the same as the Carberry-Murphy examples? In that he's...
No, not well. I don't think at all. One is 33. Joey Carberry's 23.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Completely different scenario altogether. One was for the immediate goal of being a realistic option should Johnny get injured for this World Cup, which Carberry needed game time in key Heineken Cup games, which he has done, and which he has done at test level as well. So it's been a win-win scenario on that fact. Jordy Murphy, I think, had signed a contract at the end of February, wasn't in Leinster's reckoning at the time, turned that around, put his head down, turned it around. Perception was that he wasn't going to play. He obviously found something, excelled for the rest of the season, won medals for Leinster, and in fairness to him, stayed loyal to Ulster and said, yeah, I signed the contract, I'll honour that, I'm going up there, and put his head down and started to work for Ulster. So I think these things you have to be very accurate on the message I suppose we're delivering, but I think it's Feeder probably that would be it would be a big loss I suppose for Leinster most definitely, but I think the big winner could be Jack McGrath.
You were, when we were talking yesterday, this was the thing you wanted to get your teeth stuck into, so go on.
No, not really. Look, I think it's ultimately it's down to the player himself, and maybe he feels his face doesn't fit in Leinster. And look, from a practical point of view, we're talking about money in World Rugby, and you cannot blame the players for trying to get the best deal possible. His deal is up a year after the World Cup. I presume if he went to Ulster after this World Cup and was moved, that he would get extended terms and conditions with Ulster, and they would probably pay him really, really good salary now that potentially he won't get after going into his last year with Leinster. Given where he's at now, obviously if he reclaims a number 1 spot for Ireland and Leinster, it'd be different. But when you get into the over 30, 31, 32, and it's understandable from the RFU's point of view, you're not going to get these 3-year deals and not going to get the same terms, although unless you're Johnny Sexton or Conor Murray, that they're at the very top end, and they're starting. You've got to be starting for Ireland week in, week out. Yeah. You've got to be a big game player for Ireland to be demanding the big money when you get into your 30s. And that's not happening for Jack at the moment. He's a brilliant player. I'm a massive fan of his. And, maybe he feels a change of scenery, a revamp. He hasn't, things haven't been perfect for him since he's come back from that Lions tour, where I felt he was probably the best loose head in Europe. Yeah. And probably should have started particularly that third test ahead of Makavunapolo. But sometimes he'll know better himself, and maybe that change of scenery is what he wants. But ultimately he's going to try and get himself a good contract to probably, it potentially could be his last one.
Ronan, we're going to let you off, but your quick word on tomorrow's game. First of all, 2 from 2 so far, things trucking along nicely. Some nice highlight clips doing the rounds as well.
Hey, which highlight clips?
The Matele clip
from Manasseh.
Yes, yeah.
It's that was a spectacular offload. I think actually people are missing. Actually, I think if you go and watch Richie Mwanga, his anticipation to get into space, a good lesson for young kids. He's two big forwards in front of him, but like if he doesn't make that initiate where the space is, it's great. But yeah, I think the most pleasing thing is we actually train that. That's, you don't train spectacular offloads like that, but you actually, from a coaching point of view, you encourage that. But that was obviously a dream scenario. But we were lucky to beat the Blues, to be fair, first round. So we're going up against Brad Thorne, and big Leinster favourite tomorrow. He's head coach of the Reds. So the slate is clean. Let's see how we go and reassess when I chat to him Monday or Tuesday. Yeah.
Very good. Excellent. Thanks, million, Ronan.
See you. Cheers, Adrian. Thanks.
Weekend. Thanks, Ronan O'Gara on the line there from Brisbane. One last one on Jack McGrath. Like you mentioned about sort of what a quality player he is. Bernard Jackman was on here doing the depth chart of the front row a couple of, not only 6-7 weeks ago, and talking about how Jack McGrath would walk onto any other team in the Heineken Cup and walk into any other team. Most other teams, actually, was the expression he used internationally. And he's obviously fallen a bit behind Dave Kilcoyne, even in an Irish context. Is that just to do with game time, or is there something else going on?
It's probably to do with game time and, not playing week in, week out. And if props don't play fairly regularly, they can lose that bit of sharpness and edge. And look, on the back of that line, so it was a long season for him. And when you're kind of at the top, you've got to keep the secret is maintaining your level of fitness and desire and all that kind of stuff. And maybe that waned a little bit. We don't know the ins and outs of why he hasn't been starting, but we do know that Cian Healy has been playing incredibly well. So it's difficult, and maybe that's frustrated him and had an effect on him. And he didn't start for Leinster against Toulouse, or wasn't on the bench for Leinster against Toulouse in Europe in January. So that was probably a big blow for him. Ed Byrne started ahead of him, but it's trying to, as any coach, and Leo Cullen probably has the biggest problem of all, keeping players happy, because there's so many quality players, and that's so many numbers there, and that's why some of them are, or maybe they're being tapped up and being asked, are they interested in going to the other provinces? And if they lose Jack McGrath after Joey Carberry and Geordie Murphy, I think it's a bit of a hammer blow to him, Yeah, but look, you have a little smirk on your face saying it. I'll happily take many Leinster players that are good enough to go down to Munster, and Ulster will take them the same, because at the end of the day,
they have to prove themselves in a blue jersey first before they get.
Look, at the end of the day, they ultimately it's different, and Leinster have. It wasn't long ago I was pessimistic about the chances of any of the provinces in Europe, and Leinster just have a conveyor belt of players coming through. But I do have empathy for Mick Dawson as well. They're producing players, and some of these guys are moving on. Joey Carberry was the biggest blow to him. As a 22-year-old leaving when your starting out half is 33, you think you have a natural successor and a really top quality current international to take over for him. Losing him was massive for him, but understandably for Jack McGrath, he's checking his options. That's just the way of the world now, Adrian. It didn't happen back in my day, because you probably keep the head down and you didn't have those options, and it was frowned upon if you were looking at going to another province, or something like that, unless you were down the pecking order. Sean Cronin did it. He went to Connacht via Leinster, became an incredible player for Leinster and international. Owen Redden went to Wasps, came back to Leinster. Trevor Hogan, Stephen Keogh. And those guys were probably second and third string at the time. And I mean that respectfully to them. They felt, I should be more than that. I want to be a starter, and I'm not getting a crack at it. And maybe Jack McGrath feels now that, look, he's not going to close that gap, and that he needs to go somewhere else. From an Irish point of view, to have Kilcoyne starting for Munster, or James Cronin, who's been there before as well and has had a terrible time with injuries. Jack McGrath starting for Ulster, or Eric O'Sullivan.
Poor old Eric O'Sullivan. He's done the same thing. Former Leinster player who's gone up to get game time.
And Healy starting in Cian Healy in Leinster, and Dennis Buckley probably in Connacht. You now have 5 or 6 tight heads that are all available to the national team, and that's the bigger picture.
You have an appointment, you need to get out of here.
Correct.
Where are you off to?
Going to the gym.
Are you?
A little bit of training.
Pop a bit of weight, or what it's a...
Spin class.
Spin class, right?
Yeah, exactly.
How often do you do that?
A couple of times a week.
Right, good. I've done it a few times. It's good for a workout.
It's good physically and mentally, to do a little bit, The body is creaking though. Knees are sore, hips are sore, back is sore.
War wounds.
The bike is a little less impact, I do a bit of running as well, but anyway.
Yeah. Good stuff. Enjoyed that.
Thank you, Adrian.
As always, Alan Quinlan with us on a Friday. Just a reminder as well that we've been running a brilliant competition all week. It's with thanks to Dove Men Plus Care. We've picked out a daily winner for the last 4 mornings. They've all gone into the hat for Sunday's draw. We'll be giving you a chance to enter later on, and on Saturdays off the ball as well. The winner will be announced on Sunday, and there's a great prize as well for a couple of runners up too. The winner is going to join the RFU kitman John Moran as he prepares the dressing room for the Irish rugby team. It's ahead of their final training session before the big game, and if that isn't enough, the winner's also going to receive a pair of tickets to see Ireland-France at the Aviva the following day. So it's a pretty sweet prize to be in with a chance to win. Just tell us what your favourite rugby jersey is. You can tweet us your comment where you're watching the show, and make sure to use the hashtag TeamCare and the hashtag OTBAM just so we know that you've entered. It makes it life a bit easier for us, and we can pick out your tweet a bit like this one here from Leah, who is going for the Ireland 2011 special Rugby World Cup jersey. Have you been asked this week, Quinny?
Yeah, I have. I think I picked the French one after my second cap in the old Lansdowne Road.
Ah, right, yeah.
I like the French jersey a lot. There's loads of Irish ones. The World Cup one, the new World Cup ones in 2003, they were cool. The new Canterbury ones that time.
Leinster 2011.
Sorry? Excuse me?
You having that?
I love the
lovely jersey.
The Connacht jersey in 2016. Remember when they won the Pro 14? Were you over supporting your province?
No, because they're not my province. Leinster 2011, beautiful jersey. Light blue.
Well, they were up against Leinster in that final, weren't they? Or was it Leinster in the semi-final?
Yeah, it was Leinster.
Right, you need to get out to spinning class, so let's wrap this up.